As I mentioned in our last lecture, the tactics can be of a different kind. There can be tactics which involve checks. There can be tactics involving the direct attack, the tactics which can involve pieces insufficiently protected, tactics complex which can feature different things, and there can be also tactics which do not work. There can also be tactics which are refuted by other tactics. So to see the possibility, to see the example of tactics which did not quite work, which could be refuted by other tactics, we take a look at my game against Karpov from Keres Memorial, played earlier this year in Tallinn. So if you take a look at the position, you will see that basically white is better. White's main advantage is that his pieces are better developed, his structure is healthier, and he is exerting unpleasant pressure on the A5 pawn. And this being a rapid game, I'm playing black. I thought I could use some tactics in order to get rid of this pressure. Now, what these tactics can be in this position? The thing is that white's knight on d3, whilst being a strong piece attacking the pawn on a5, also at the same time is vulnerable to the attack. So it is a bit hanging, and it is a piece which I can attack with bishop e6. And that's what I did. Bishop e6. Now you see, you could say, what could be tactical about this just simple move? You just attack the knight, nothing happening. But if you take a look, if you take a closer look at this position, you will see that in fact black's knight is also hanging on e5. So in fact I am developing my piece despite the fact that my other piece is hanging, also attacking his piece. So in chess this is pretty common and usually very often leads to exchanges. Like he takes my piece, I take his piece, and everybody is happy. But in fact, when you look at this position, you should ask yourself, can I actually get more for my piece than just exchange? So you see, e5 is hanging at the moment, and b3 is hanging. So you think, maybe I can sacrifice it for more than just a knight. And that's how basically the move knight takes a5 occurs to you. You see, the knight is hanging anyway, and you collect the pawn on a5. So that's using some small tactics in return for black small tactics with bishop e6. But again, I saw as far, and I thought I could use some clever idea of my own. Now, if I take on a5 with a bishop, he takes bishop e5, and that's it. It's just pawn up in the endgame. So I prepared rook takes a5. Of course, he cannot take on a5 because then I have just two pieces for the rook, which gives advantage. And of course, his idea was to take on e5, as we know. And now my idea was to use the fact that the bishop is hanging on e5, and to use the fact that the a4 pawn is vulnerable. You see how seeing the different aspects of the position helps us to see the tactical means. The bishop is hanging, pawn is hanging, and then you put all this together and see the move bishop b3. Trying to win the pawn back by attacking the bishop and attacking the pawn. And in the game, white played bishop f4, rook takes a4, rook takes a4, bishop a4, rook a1, and very soon the game ended in a draw. Not much happened otherwise. And we agreed to a draw because white just goes, let's say g4, rook b5, bishop c7, and it's a draw. Draw was agreed after rook b4. And if you just play through this game, you could see nothing much happened. Black played bishop e6, knight a5, and then rook a5, and bishop b3, and just won his pawn back. There was not much tactics involved. I mean, this is all pretty simple. But there are some hidden contents. After knight a5, rook a5, bishop e5, bishop b3, there is in fact a very clever way for white to avoid the loss of a pawn. And it is connected with some feature almost hidden at the moment. You see, if you have a vivid imagination, and vivid imagination is necessary to see tactics, it is necessary to develop your imagination, you could see that after black will capture on e5, his back rank will be weak. So after rook a5, if I could give a check on the h, that would be made. And thus, you could come to the idea of defending your pawn and maybe activating your rook in such a way that after rook e5, a check on the h, on the back rank will become possible. And thus, you stumble upon bishop d1. And now everything miraculously grows together. After bishop d1, rook d1. Okay, I just kept the pawn because rook e5 is just made. And if black tries something else, if black tries, let's say, bishop c4, saying, okay, you are pawn up, but I'm attacking your rook and your bishop. That's why retreats his bishop, also attacking the rook. And bishop f1, bishop a5, bishop a5, king f1, and white is basically pawn up. So, as such unusual means, bishop d1, despite the fact that white bishop was hanging, white manages to keep his pawn up. After bishop a4, for instance, also tactics trying to use the fact that the bishop is hanging and just get the pawn in between. Then bishop c3 also wins some material. Now, the rook being attacked and the bishop being attacked. And in this case, tactics would help white to keep the pawn, which black sacrificed, trying to get out of the unpleasant situation. So you see that tactics do not necessarily involve sacrifices, attacking the king, and so on, not necessarily connected with some deep attacking ideas or and some of the kind, some great concepts. Concepts can be very simple, can serve some, so to speak, domestic purpose. Just in this case, white lost the pawn and tries to save it to get a favorable endgame. And such tactics, they go throughout almost every good game. Such tactics almost unseen, almost invisible. So bishop d1 in this case, a move which would have helped white to save his pawn, and the move which remained unseen in this game by both opponents. And there was yet another moment in this game where tactics could work. This after bishop f4 played in the game, rook a4. If I would carelessly play rook ac1, thinking that he puts pressure on c7, then there is another positional aspect which creates possibility of tactical tricks. There is unprotected bishop on e2, and as we see it, we see rook takes f4 is possible. E takes f4 and rook takes e2 with a winning endgame for black. So once again, we see from this example that tactics are not necessarily connected with kingside attacks and mating. Tactics can serve the purpose in seemingly very quiet endgames and can sometimes be unseen even by fairly strong chess players. That's it, we move on.